That's why we're all here. Um, okay, so first, just real quick, 30, 60-second roundtable of great art that inspired you or you're interested in this week, and then we'll get into art and sense of life or this last 2 weeks. Anybody want to start with something that
It's
they
just the four
liked?
of us today. Yeah.
Yeah, I think well, I changed the time, so I think it's just going to be the four of
Yeah,
us.
that's cool. Let me just start, I guess. Movies are mostly what I watch, and I guess that counts, right?
Yeah,
Do we
of
count
course it
movies as
counts.
art?
Hell yeah. I was
Um,
a film major.
okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
love
So
movies.
we watched All the Right Moves. If you
Okay.
remember that movie from the
Uh-huh.
80s.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was interesting watching it now again. I've seen that movie a few times, but watching it again with this context and just trying to think more about these ideas and like what am I responding to and all of that was fun and really seeing that at the end of the day, like what the filmmaker was choosing to make important for these characters and how it was most, it's a coming of age story, but
Mhm.
it's still like very benevolent universe and this character who's Tom Cruise is a football player and he's good, but his goal is to be an engineer. He's like
Mhm.
accepting the reality that he's a short guy. He's not going to be an awesome pro player and he's okay with that, but he wants to do well so he can go to college because they're poor. They live in this steel town in Pennsylvania. But like, there's none of this victim stuff. There's nothing like that in that movie. It's just like, this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And there's some conflict and drama with his coach and all of that, and a happy ending. But
Huh.
it's just
Yeah.
fun to watch a movie like that where it's like, oh, it's like I realizing like this is a character with actual self-esteem
Yeah.
again, like Rand talks about that. I've always struggled a little bit because I don't read a lot of fiction, but like this romantic idea of man and goal directed, but it really showed to me in that film. It was just like this character has self-esteem and he knows what he wants and he has a plan to go do it and he executes on it and he has conflict, but ultimately he triumphs. And I
Yeah.
expect that of a good 80s movie, just growing up in the 80s. I expect a positive ending. It's not like syrupy or
Yeah.
whatever, but it's just
That's a
like,
good
yeah,
movie for sure. Yeah. I
yeah.
think people should
But
watch it. I think like it makes me think of like October Sky and other things like that where it's really value oriented and pursued. Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
That's I'll try to remember to post since you can't post to post a trailer of it in Art
okay.
Social for you. And we'll try to get because I would love for
Uh,
people to watch that movie. But let's
yeah.
Mark or Michael, what inspired you this last 2 weeks?
Well, I like pop music, but I tend to try to explore the more obscure corners of it. Um, so I was looking into some old sort of the evolution of ska into reggae and
Hmm.
rock steady music from Jamaica, and I came across it's there's this whole network of both groups and singles artists and singers that folks came and went that not really with the long sense of career, but there was one particular vocal group called the Techniques,
Hmm.
and um, I think I like them. There's a great song that they had called "You Are My Everything," and they were basically a singles band. So you're not going or singles group. So you're not really going to find whole albums of anything other than just compilations and stuff. But I'm really enjoying that.
Cool. Okay. Well, hopefully you'll share something from that.
Mhm.
Um,
I'll make a post about it
yeah.
sometime this.
I just posted Tom so I could not forget, but go ahead, Michael. What you got?
Well, I read for a second time Oedipus Rex,
Mm,
um, and I really like that play
me too. Yeah, it's
of
fantastic.
this kind of search for the truth and the difference between like physical sight and intellectual sight or insight is is an interesting metaphor to me,
Yeah.
and I just think it deals with the themes of uh, responsibility and in a sense and guilt, and I'd argue Oedipus is innocent, even though he goes to extremes in the self-punishment, but it's a
Well,
moving drama.
yeah, I mean that's one for definitely a lot of discussion. I've done that in the club before for sure. And I mean I think it's just such a fantastic work given the time period, but also just it has universal values and there's a reason why Freud used it as a psychological example for sure. Um anyway, okay, so mine would be a poem called The Crystal Cabinet by William Blake, which I've read a long time ago, but I forgot about. And I really love it. I found, I don't know how much stuff I want to reveal about my personal life, but when you're talking about art, it definitely does. And one thing that's interesting about this poem is the sense in which falling in love with the woman could be like being captured by her in a sense in a crystal cabinet. And that's what the metaphor is, I think, kind of about is that experience you have when you start to see someone in a different light, and then you're kind of bewitched or enraptured by that person. And I think that's kind of what this poem has done, which, art reflects reality a little bit sometimes. So that's I think why I was kind of attracted to this poem. There's more to it than
It
that, but
recreates reality.
it creates reality too.
Re
Okay, so
recreate. Let's say.
and,
Anyway,
and that's so let's get into art and sense of life. Speaking of all this. Okay. So thank you for sharing. The interesting thing about this for me, after not reading it for years, that I want to start with is the analogy at the beginning. I think it's one of the more famous analogies in Rand's nonfiction, I think. I've heard it many times outside of it, even with non-artistic people. They often refer to this or talk about in terms of the movement of objectivism. What is the analogy, and what is she saying?
This is the cold sore.
Yes,
Yeah,
or metaphor, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
Analogy.
yeah. Actually, that particular, like, I first read this essay, 30 years ago or whatever, and that is the one that's stuck in my brain. It's still in my head,
That's what I'm
and
saying.
it's
Yeah,
like you said, it's
so
so.
powerful.
Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting? Because you think
Yes.
like, yeah, like once it's put into art, like it's like, yes, something like that can happen in everyday life. A beautiful woman can have a cold sore and it's insignificant. But once the artist has a portrait that paints a portrait of this woman and then includes the cold sore, he's making a real, he's making a huge statement. He's elevating the importance of it. And he's saying that, whatever beauty is marred or isn't possible or whatever, how she goes into it. But
Well, Tom, you
I
said
always
some.
thought that well, just to finish the point was just like
Yeah.
that was just like this idea of a cold sore on a beautiful woman, and then I thought like, what do we get when we see just a complete smeared canvas or uh, you know a completely distorted portrait of someone who's melting and looking gross. It's like look at the difference there, even like, but
Hmm.
that's such a great.
I wanted a question to ask for you, though. I have a question for you because you said something I think is really important. That, and that is, you said, "Isn't it interesting that years later I recall this analogy, something like that, right?" What do you? I think there's something because we're talking about art, and Rand talks about this in terms of the concretes. I think there's something really important about what you just said and your identification of this concrete thing. And then you went on to like what the meaning of it was.
Mm,
And I just wanted to ask you guys to think about that for a second. What do you think about that? Because it's an important insight you just had.
yeah. Right, like it's saying that the power of the concrete example is what is remaining
Yes, it's
and
not the
staying and
abstraction by itself.
yeah, exactly. And it's what
Yeah.
I call to mind
Yes.
to get to the abstraction ultimately.
Yes. And that
But
is
I
the
start
value of
there.
art, essentially. I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah.
essentially the value of art. An analogy isn't exactly art in like a fine art, but it is. It has this, it's the material of art. And so Ayn Rand, that's one of the reasons why she's so good is she's an artist as a writer. And
Mm,
it's one reason why I struggle with so many writers today, and especially, and I love so many of them, but especially some objectivist writers, is they don't have that artistic flair that is able to create the right kind of analogy that helps stick in your mind. And I think it's just so powerful in Ayn Rand's writing. And this is just one of the more famous ones, but there's a lot of it. And I think, well, we can go on. Okay, so anybody else on this first opening analogy? Any thoughts on it?
Um, I just I philosophically it's interesting because we sometimes talk about how the different branches of philosophy build upon each other,
Hmm.
as if they were, as if it were just sort of like a building or a pyramid structure where there's the large base of metaphysics, and then on top of that you put epistemology, blah blah blah, and all the way up. But here, this is this is pointing out that it's not that linear a structure.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
That is this is the direct line from aesthetics to metaphysics. It's not like you have to shoot through the other layers or something like that, mentally, or in terms of your conceptual hierarchy. This is the direct line between the well, okay, there. I mean, you can spread off. You can say, oh well, my perception is being is happening this way or whatever, and that's epistemology. But um, in terms of the communication that's occurring between the artist and the viewer or the audience, it is a direct line from their aesthetic practice to their metaphysics.
Yeah.
There is nothing in between.
No, that's a really interesting point. And it makes me think of the criticism that the romanticists, the early 18th, 19th century romanticists had of classicism and this burgeoning new scientific way of looking at the world where it's like everything has to be these really straight lines, and they're like arguing, but everything is more organic than that.
Well, it's
And I think
everything's interconnected, and
everything's interconnected, and well,
and
they
she
called it
and she
organic.
goes
Yeah, but
yeah, and
Michael,
she goes on to that,
yeah,
talking about later in the essay about how um and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but
that's
she
okay.
talks
Go
about
for it.
how there's this um this kind of, you have kind of a file effects in your brain, or whatever, of you know this is connected to that, this is connected to that, this is connected to that, and that's what drives one's sense of life, of selecting from those connections what is important, what is going to be
Yes.
recreated in my art.
And she talks about normative and cognitive in the last chapter, I believe,
Right.
abstractions, and like there's string
Yeah.
of so that, like you're saying, this triangle of
but
metaphysics and all this stuff. But Michael, you were wanting to say something.
but those are just models
Yeah,
of that's just a model of how to describe a body of knowledge, like philosophy or something.
sure.
It is just a projection of that onto a some kind of a structure that you can keep in your head. In terms of how one actually uh, processes it and practices philosophy, and uh, communicates via philosophic ideas with between artist and viewer, uh, it is a lot more interconnected than that.
Sure.
It is not
It's all very interconnected. Yeah.
it is not a hierarchy. It is not this tree of
Yeah.
this branches off to this branches off to that. No, it's a tangle.
Absolutely. Michael, what you got?
Uh, I think related to Mark's point, but just that objectivity applies to art as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the point here is that uh, uh, you know, starting with Aristotle, that only particulars exist, and universals are a mental uh,
Yes.
our mental means of knowing the world, and it's just that from the particulars in existence that you can see their deeper significance on these various planes, like Mark's talking about, that
Yep.
ethically or metaphysically or so forth, and uh, related to the example, the analogy of the cold sore is that. Um, she talks about the naturalist school saying just because it exists, it should be included. Whereas Brand answers that, art should be a stylized recreation of selecting things in existence that are uh, most significant or
So I
metaphysically.
think she's saying
But
something a little
but
differently though. So so
yeah, sorry.
one second. So like when she's saying something different, Michael, you're saying that her point about naturalism is that you should do it this way. But I think she's saying that art is this way. And so
Yeah,
like even if you're a
the naturalists are doing
naturalist,
that.
they're still style because the whole point of art, like no matter what it is, even if you're writing a journalistic story, Michael, you're still selecting certain things to put in and versus others, right? And like
Yeah,
what to focus on, emphasize. And with
yeah.
any artwork, you're still doing that. So the question for the naturalist is what's the selector? Right?
and
What's the
and their
determining
answer
selector?
is and their answer is nothing is important.
Yeah.
Man's mind is impotent to select.
Maybe.
So
Yeah.
I'm just going to vomit out everything I think I see. And oh, maybe if my sense of life happens to creep in and I think the ugliest stuff gets a little bit more play, okay, fine, that's fine, but I'm not going to explicitly state
Yeah.
that, but sometimes I
And
do.
that's her point about the cold sore, I think, is that yes, women have cold sores sometimes. But that, like if you, depending on the subject and style of your painting, that's going to say something that the fact that you chose that, even if your fundamental argument is, well, women have that sometimes, which they do. Now, here's a
Mhm.
challenge. I'm going to try to remember to send this to you, but if you guys can do this in the Arts Social, I think it'd be a fun challenge. Is because I always like to kind of build in almost counterpoints to what Ayn Rand's making in a sense, but I think it actually emphasizes. And that is, I think you should use AI and create a painting that does have a cold sore on a woman, but it doesn't destroy it. So I do think there's ways depending on so like my point is that the fact that there's a cold sore is not does not mean that it's an evil painting per se in the way that she's writing it. That there is, and I could give you an example if you're interested, but or we could do this as an exercise in the off channel. But I just want to give you that as a challenge of like, think about you're an artist and you're given this by a teacher. Like you need to paint anything you want. It has to be a beautiful woman with a cold sore though. She has to have some cold sore. And I think there's a way you could do it where, and it doesn't negate it. It doesn't make it evil. And this goes into what she's talking about in other places in this essay and in the later on. But
Sure. And of course, the question then becomes, what does that say about the sense of life of the teacher?
okay, so then I'll just have to explain what I mean by that. So, like, what I mean by that is imagine a painting where a young woman, and she's in her room upstairs, and you paint the room, and you can paint it from an outside perspective, and you can maybe see a young man getting out of his door to get to her, or out of his
Oh,
car to get to her door, and she's like, she's beautiful, and she's frantically trying to cover up this thing. I do not think that negates it, and you still have the cold sore. So my point is about subject and style, which Ayn
mhm.
Rand talks about later. About if you're saying that if you're just drawing a picture of a beautiful woman and that's it, and you're just projecting beauty of a woman, and then you put it on there, then you're just scarring it for the sake of scarring it. But if you there's so like my point is that things, like Cyrano de Bergerac's nose is bulbous and ugly and hairy, right? It's got like a hair mole on it, but that doesn't negate the beauty of him and the story and the character. It
Right. So
emphasizes.
it's about what else you include and
Yes.
whether whether it's eh, you're talking about extending it from just simple, portraiture, which again she's simplifying it in this metaphor here,
Yes.
and into visually creating a narrative, which which emphasizes other things, which shows that there's something else going on other than just a snapshot.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that I think is important about the analogy, but I sometimes think again, the danger with Ayn Rand is she's so good that we tend to latch onto it and just kind of take that as a universal, like everything. And the value of what she's providing us is material to think about. And I
Right.
don't think it's necessarily that a cold sore means that it's an evil painting.
No,
Um,
no, no.
Yeah.
It
you know,
it doesn't. Yeah, that's that. Well, that's the funny thing. If you're focused on that and thinking, oh well, this is an absolute, that anything that has any kind of
negative.
negative or marring of like absolute beauty and perfection necessarily destroys the entire aesthetic of the painting. Well, I
But I
mean,
see that a lot in objectivists I've talked to, where I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that view is prevalent.
because they're to get to Michael's points, they're thinking, yeah, only things exist, only particulars exist, or, as Aristotle said, but then they're just focused on particulars. It's just particulars are all that it's worth thinking about.
Mhm. So, okay, thank you, everybody. I do want to move on. I think it's an important analogy, but there's some stuff about sense of life. So she says on the next page, 25, but a sense of life is the source of art, the psychological mechanism which enables man to create a realm such as art. So this essay is called Art and Sense of Life. So, she defined art, she defined sense of life. What is she saying here in this area about the mechanism which enables man to create a realm? What do you think?
I'm deferring to everybody else right now. I don't.
Yeah. I think that
I,
I mean, that's a huge point. It's just this idea that, you know, like that's if there is art, if someone is creating art, they're saying that's, I guess she's saying that's where it's coming from. That's the mechanism that, that is the fact of reality that creates the need for it, or the need for an expression. Because I
Yeah.
have the sense of life, this needs to be expressed somehow on a canvas or something. That's what I'm expressing. It's like a total thing. I don't try to express, I guess you don't try to express a minor point or some fact over here. It's like you're always, the motivation behind it, all of that comes from sense of life, I guess. I guess that's what you're saying.
No, I think that's very important. And if you look at, certain birds will make things that are they look kind of pretty. And it seems like they're doing it to be pretty, to attract a mate or something like that, right? There are things but we wouldn't call that an art. We wouldn't call it sense of life. I mean, some people might, it's like a cute decoration or something that attracts a mate. A lot of animals have that kind of thing. But there's something deeper, obviously, with humans because we're the most complex animal. And I think she's saying there's this whole source of the way that we approach the world conceptually and abstractly that allows us to interact and transform the world into the image of our values type thing. And that's
Right.
the
We're usually,
source that's necessary for art.
yeah, we're
Go ahead.
we're off, artists especially, but um, we're capable of, and hopefully do, more often than not, communicate things uh more subtle than just please mate with me.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Although that's important too.
Well, yeah,
Man, so
yeah, but
I'm just kidding.
yeah, there
Go
are
ahead,
things
Mike.
you do for
Go for
that
it, Mike.
too. But
But yeah, no, you're right. This is the evolutionary psychology people who would then say, oh, yeah, we're just like the bird. The reason you're doing
Exactly.
that is so you can attract a mate. It's all about status seeking. That's why you became an artist, or why you paint the paintings you do,
Yeah,
to
and that's the
attract a,
only reason. And some people will say
yeah,
it's because you want power, and people are just about power, or some people will say it's like just money, and they'll have these like really, those things are important, having a
why
kind of,
are they important? But I know we're
yeah,
going to get away from
yeah. I don't
aesthetic.
want to get, yeah, it's too much,
Yeah.
but I agree. It's an important thing because it's relevant, but it's not the fundamental. I think is one of Ayn Rand's things. But Michael, go for it. Just um, chime.
So she says a little bit below that that there's two um, characteristics, that it's automatic and that it's personal, as to why sense of life is this source of art. Um, and a related point that it's sense of life is this emotional sum. Um, she clarifies later that emotions aren't sufficient professional equipment for an artist, that
Mm,
you have to bring in certain techniques like subject, style, theme, and so forth. So there's still definite cognitive process, but I find it interesting still that the source, the first step is this emotional response, and she's sums up that emotional state as, this is what life means to me.
yeah.
Um,
And that one, we'll talk about this in the next chapter, I think the most, the art and cognition one, because that's going to be, I think, a really, if I can, I'll try to make that one 90 minutes for a discussion, because that one's a big one.
yeah,
It's the
it's a long
biggest,
one.
it's a long one, and there's a lot going on. But yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of touching on certain aspects of that is really going to be important going forward. Um, so on page 26, she says, man's sense of life provides him with the integrated sum of his metaphysical abstractions. Art concretizes them and allows him to perceive, to experience, she emphasizes, their immediate reality. I think that's really important. What do you think she means by that? So the sense of life provides integrated sum of your metaphysical abstractions. That means your view of man and existence at its deepest level. And art concretizes these abstractions and ideas and allows you to perceive them, to experience them.
Yeah, I mean, th this came up in previous essay, in the first essay, I think, just that she talks about the power of art, of um, that it philosophy has abstract questions, and that your day-to-day experience might challenge those fundamental beliefs. But art is supposed to restore your perspective, restore your convictions, uh, uh, and present an ideal that you can be re-inspired by, and face the daily uh, events.
So there's something on. Oh, go ahead. You're not- oh. So there's something on page 29, because there's a point I'm trying to get to with some of this stuff that I think is important in my studies over the years of this. Is she talks about art gives him that fuel, the pleasure of contemplating the objectified reality of one's own sense of life, is the pleasure of feeling what it would be like to live in one's own ideal world. And the but the life-giving fact of the experience a moment of experiencing a moment of metaphysical joy, a moment of love for existence. And she talks about this kind of stuff here, and she mentions that she talks about it in chapter 11, and it's elsewhere, and there's a lot that she talks about with this idea of the it feels like when you read it that what she's saying is the purpose of art is to be fuel for you, and it's to live in one's own ideal world. That's how I've heard it conveyed to me by objectivists. I either actually kind of disagree with Ayn Rand, or I think it's a misinterpretation of what she's actually saying.
I think it's not well, I think that is a function of it, but that doesn't just because it's a function of art, just because that is a the just because that's I think that function is a little bit too clinical. That is the reason one seeks out art. That is the motivator
Yeah.
of art,
Of what you're trying to look for when you go to a movie.
That is the that is, I think she's saying um
That's a good way of
that's
putting it.
that's
It's
the attractor.
yeah, like that's you're either trying to confirm your negative metaphysical view of the world or you're trying to elevate yourself to a higher,
Th-
depending on what type of person your sense of life. That's a
but
good
that is but that is not all that
that's not
occurs when one uses art.
yeah, because
When one consumes art, when one uses art, consumes art, when one experiences art,
experiences are yeah.
that is not all that occurs,
Yeah.
and that's not the purpose of art any more than, I mean, there again, this is it's a very um I don't want to get too far afield, but this comes from the same part of people who ask, well, what is the purpose of life? You know,
Sure.
it's this very reductive idea of um
Well, like an outside purpose is usually what I think people mean
yeah,
when they
yeah,
say
they're
that.
looking they're
Like
they're
there's like a
looking for
God sent purpose of life. That's like
yeah, they're looking for
this,
something imposed from outside of themselves,
yeah,
to say this is it's this is the input of, you're doing this, therefore you get this. I'm you know you're experiencing art, therefore you get this. And that's not what's happening with art. It the validation of one's sense of life attracts you to it, or at least maybe you want to or maybe you're doing it because you're um curious about uh, experiencing somebody else's sense of life, but that is not that is not all that occurs when one
yeah.
experiences.
So I mean, she in this paragraph, excuse me, she's talking about a rational man's ambition. And I think she's putting it in that context. And I think that's where sometimes when people are thinking about art broadly and the exploration of art, which is something I'm always interested in, it challenges a lot of objectivists because it's like they only want to experience something that gives them the utmost joy and pleasure in the moment. And it's like there's a lot of experiences in the world and in your life that you should have that I think as part of the whole spectrum. But you do definitely need what Ayn Rand is talking about. And she's talking about this in a very specific way. But I think there's other kinds of experiences that you can have that are worthwhile, including how to overcome a failure or something and focus on the failure and things like that. Yeah, Michael.
When I was reading this passage, I was reminded of my personal background in engineering, that we would create concept art, art in a loose sense, like you're saying that there, a notion of the product that we're going to work towards, and that serves throughout the development. That okay, this is our end state, and we're striving towards it. And I was just comparing that to the end product for art is your life. Um,
Sure.
that, you have this idea of what you want your life to be and to get to, and striving for that, and art can help you, give ideals and
I just laughing at Mark's little. Yeah, I think that's really important, and I'll bring this up again. I've already brought it up, but like the lecture that Peikoff gave, the survival value of false, philosophically false but great art, is really valuable. I think to especially objectivists who've read a lot of Rand, because I think there's a tendency to fall into this trap of like it's just got to be this certain kind of Rorkean success story or it's not good art and I can't enjoy it. And it's like, no, there's so much. I mean, Cyrano doesn't succeed and it's Ayn Rand's favorite play, right? So it's like you're missing something in a sense about the experience and the splendor that is out there with all the art that's there in the world.
yeah, this is that's a good point. It comes up in this essay too, as
Yes,
far
it
as
does.
evaluating things aesthetically versus philosophically. And you
Yeah,
can say something's great art, even if it's philosophically wrong. And but it's still, yeah, I agree. It doesn't have to be your ideal life per se. It, it's good art if it contains abstract or universal themes that you can relate to. And at the very least, it raises fundamental questions that um, the answer might an the artist might answer, and you might disagree with that answer, but it prompts you to think about it for yourself. How would I answer this, or how would I question, or how would I do things differently?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. I appreciate what Michael's saying because then this is something that when I was younger, I felt that like, oh God, I must have a shitty sense of life, or my whole philosophy sucks because I like certain things that, and maybe objectivists would think these are bad. But what I realize now, now that I'm older and seeing all this stuff, and like I would what I do get really frustrated with in a film is like a sloppiness when they don't even try. But
Yeah.
if it's a film where like I haven't seen The Brutalist, but I can tell from the trailer that movie really looks gorgeous. It looks like he's really trying to produce
Yeah.
a film of a certain scale, but also I know enough about the story that it's kind of bleak and sad, and it's like all this stuff, and it's kind of like, well, it's not a feel good story, but it's also
Yeah.
like, well, at least he's trying. He's going big.
There's something
He's
important he's
shooting
trying to
70
convey.
millimeter, and he's trying to
Yeah.
capture something that's important. And it's like, well, that's what I want, and so
That's
that's
what,
enough
yeah.
because I'm not going to get. You're not going to go to the Cineplex and get your objectivist menu of films. It's
Mhm.
impossible, right? Like in the culture, you have to find what you can get. And sometimes it's about seeing a film and appreciating somebody who at least tried to convey something, even if it wasn't what I would convey.
Yeah.
They're, and they did a good job of it. Like they
And
did, like, wow, that was a dark movie. Well done.
yeah. And
You can
Mark,
appreciate it, right?
absolutely. And Mark, one
Yeah.
second, but I think an important thing about that is I wouldn't want just an objectivist menu of art. Like I
Mhm.
like part of what I like about being alive and being a human being is meeting different people with different viewpoints. I don't have to agree with everybody. And part
Yeah.
of the joy of stuff is engaging with it. And I've just so long in objectivism and the movement that I've interacted with, it's like we can only talk to each other. We can only talk to this type of, and it's like, but the splendor of life is, like the splendor of love is interacting with someone reflects the values in a different way, or even just a friendship where you unite on something and then they have fundamentally different things on something else. And it's like, wow, I don't agree, but this is so interesting. Unless it's truly evil, that's different. But there's just such a cornucopia of ways of looking at the world and experiences that it's just like, that's what I want in my art. I want to see something grand and wonderful and beautiful, or devastating, even if I disagree. But Mark, go ahead.
I just wanted to summarize what everybody's saying and just say that, and this gets to um, Rand's point later in the essay about aesthetic judgments versus philosophic judgments. Great art or is not the same thing as great philosophy.
Mm,
Greatness
yeah.
is a different it is a different scale. It is a different evaluation. Um, Tom's talking about the sloppiness, and whether something is executed well can be appreciated regardless of the sense of life that's being depicted. Um, the same is also true of relationships with people, like Kirk, you're saying about how you don't want to always socialize with people who are carbon copies of yourself. Um, Great connections with people, whether they're connections directly as a relationship or connections indirectly through to an artist, are not the same thing as living and practicing a great philosophy.
Yeah. Now, you're talking about this, Marcus. I think we should move to it. The truth or falsehood of a given artist's philosophy as such is not an aesthetic matter. And then she talks, this is page 30, and then she talks about how some sort of philosophical meaning, however, some implicit view of life is a necessary element of a work of art. The absence of any metaphysical values, whatever, gray, uncommitted, passively, results in a soul without fuel, motor, or voice. So I've kind of countered a lot of what Ayn Rand, or tried to challenge it in a certain way of what she's saying. But I think there's something really important about what she's saying too, specifically in the sense of the need for the motor and fuel of your life. That there is something. I don't think that it's just in this joyous, you know, pleasantness all the time. That there's that even if you're looking at a tragedy or a tragic comedy like Cyrano de Bergerac, the projection of the hero as a hero and the way that he's projected, even if in that sense he kind of fails in a certain way, although he lives very integral life, is a projection of the worldview of what you want to, the type of person you want to be, meet, and interact with. And so that's very valuable, even though he kind of fails, right?
I was just thinking back to Oedipus that like you don't literally have to repeat the crimes that he does, but to relate to him, like if you've made mistakes in ignorance, then you can relate to Oedipus.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to try to find this, but there's a quote in Shakespeare about this, about, this love of this. It's Antony and Cleopatra. And where it's after Antony has, killed himself, he's dead. And, Cleopatra has this view of him, and she's projecting this idea of, she's, poetically talking about this view of him as this grand hero. He bestride the world type thing, this epic man that she loved, even though it was a tragic failing in a sense. And the value of like a Shakespeare is the projection of these grand heroes, even though, as Ayn Rand puts here, they're failures, and that's kind of a Shakespearean view. But yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, what was I going to say? Oh, just that we're talking about how you might just disagree with somebody, but this whole idea of fuel, it's not looking for instant fuel for in the same sense that one doesn't look for happiness in a hedonistic range of the moment way.
Very good. Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Great art sticks with you. Great art casts you back into thinking about your own experiences in the past and what you would like to do in the future. It is not just looking for the quick sugar rush.
Yeah.
And it also takes time to appreciate a
Mhm.
good work of art. Like you might have an immediate response that Rand talks about, but you get more meaning out of it by analyzing it or spending time with it,
Which is
incorporating it
why
in
it's
your life.
which is why it's tragic that some supposed objectivists think that something has to hit you right away over your head with this is a hero, this is who you should be. No, not necessarily. And that is tragic because they're, supposedly looking for long range, uh, long-term happiness, rational happiness throughout their life. But when it comes to, uh, seeking out fuel for that, uh, they're just eating pixie sticks. They're just, looking for for the sugar rush.
Yeah. So I think there's important things here about the exploration of art, and something you can disagree with and still really love. And I think Ayn Rand is talking about that. And she has this whole two times she does this. And I think some things you guys are touching on that I think are really important about the way we experience art and the kind of anti-intellectual culture we have, where and this, I'm guilty of this. So because I grew up in this culture, and it's something I struggle with and try to, is like, we'll watch a work of art, we'll even have a profound experience, and then we'll never talk about it. We'll never write about it. We'll never ask what was good about it. We'll never do anything rational with it. Right. So it's like, I saw, how many times I've walked out of a movie with friends or something, and we never talk about it. Right. And it's all, and I remember I dated this girl a long time ago, and we walked out of a movie, and I started asking her questions and talking to her about it. And she's like, no one's ever talked to me about a movie that I just saw before. And I was like, really? I was like, what? Like, how bizarre of a culture we live in, where, and I've heard this not just from Ayn Rand, but a lot of people who write about aesthetics, about the development of your own taste and viewpoints in life, in the sense of just the simple question of like asking what, not only did you like it, which I think everyone will do that. If you ask them, did you like it? They'll say, yeah, right. But like, why did you like it? Like, start defending it, start giving reasons and things. And Rand does that in two different places in two different ways in this essay. And I wanted to discuss that, in our last 15 minutes or so. So this is page 30. I'll let you guys look at it. We don't have to read all of it, but she does it in regard, this is in regards to subject and style, right? And which is important. We're going to talk a lot about that in future essays. But she gives these examples of like Hugo and Shakespeare and Zola and Lewis and Vermeer and Tolstoy and Michelangelo and Dostoevsky and Goya. And she's giving them in this way, like he may present the triumph of heroes in factor and spirit, Victor Hugo, or their struggle, this. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on this whole process, what you think Ayn Rand is doing, why it's an art and sense of life, what she's trying to give you an example of, and you know, things like that.
I don't know. I'm just
I,
focused on your dog in the background, Kirk.
I found some of this, like, I feel like I need more time with this section in
Sure.
here. I felt like there's something really deep here. This whole thing about style and psychoepistemology. And I was like, wow, like, I had never thought of it before. And I think it's like, something about this is how I'm seeing my, what is it, how my consciousness, I'm seeing something about, yeah, confirmation of my own consciousness. Like,
So
with like
let me,
that's fascinating to me. Like in the efficacy, like I would never even think of that. So I need to think more about that. I'm not saying it's not true, but I would need to think more about when I respond to things, what's happening. But certainly, I've always had a penchant. I've always liked resolution in painting. And when I look at stuff like, I was looking at some Picasso because she talked about Cubism. So I was like, okay, let's look at some of that stuff. And I never liked it. To me, it feels more like graphic design, which is what I do for a living, but it's like graphic design. It's like, oh, it can be colorful and interesting. Like you put it up on the wall because it blends in, like it brings out the colors in your couch, but you don't contemplate it, right? There's
yeah.
nothing to contemplate.
It,
And so, uh, to me, like I have to have resolution in order to even have a real response to it, like a feeling like that I can dig into and analyze. So
yeah, Mark. No, I agree with you. That makes sense, Tom.
I'm wondering if Rand is another way of work when she's using the word style. Um, it's related. I'm not saying it's equivalent, but related to that is kind of the what the not so much what the artist is saying through their what they're depicting, their subject matter, their recreation of reality, their sense of life there, but style is kind of what they are communicating through the execution, through the actual act of creation of their art. And this gets back to Tom's disgust with sloppiness of a given movie or some things where the people aren't even trying. um that's something you can appreciate and can communicate more, something a little bit more, something a lot more subtle than just, oh, they did this well or they did this poorly, but how they did it communicates as much as what they're doing in a
mm,
given piece of art. So the Salvador Dali thing, when she's saying, "Oh, style projects the luminous clarity of rational psychoepistemology," they're talking about. She's talking about how how he's putting things on the painting, the way he's the way he's painting his lines, and the contrast and the clarity of his work. I mean, it's a mess as far as what's being depicted, but it's really, really vivid. and it's really, really sharply delineated. So
Yeah.
that's where the execution communicates something uh, on top of just the subject matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Michael,
that's interesting.
what you got?
Uh, it's maybe to put an example forth of working through an art or artist on different levels of Victor Hugo that she references, four times in here. At the end, she says her sense of life is like entering a cathedral, and putting it in emotional terms. And more intellectually, she says she appreciates his literary genius, though disagrees with his philosophy. And then in subject and style, she says it's the triumph of heroes in fact or spirit. And certainly Hugo has in spirit, less so in fact, for his heroes. They often, die. Um, but as far as in style, this blend of reason and passionate emotion in Hugo. So there's just these various elements in appreciating a work of art.
So what one thing I think she's doing that is really helpful for any human, whoever you are, whether you're an artist or not an artist, you're just trying to experience the world and improve yourself or enjoy life more. Is she does this three different times, right? So she's doing the subject. So she's focusing on the subject with this on page 30 when she talks about Hugo and Sinclair Lewis, like what kind of subject does Sinclair Lewis focus on? The folks next door to palaces, Tolstoy, or drugstores, Sinclair Lewis. That's the subject. That's the focal point. The idea about the main thing. On page 32, she talks about the style, right? So a blend of reason and passion and emotion, like you were saying, right? Victor Hugo, or a chaos of abstractions, Thomas Wolfe, which it definitely is. And Thomas Wolfe, I have read him and I've read Hugo and I've read St. Clair Lewis, and she's right about all these people. Like about the style. Now, you may not agree with her assessment of the style. I think that's not even the most important thing she's doing here. I think that's her assessment. You could disagree with her assessment, but what's really profound and important here is the example of doing this kind of thing, of thinking about the style of Sinclair Lewis, or like what kind of style are they using? How do you project? I think about the style of Margaret Mitchell or of Cervantes and Don Quixote. That's a big thing we're talking about, and a big thing of even what the subject is, which is a big debate we're having in our club on that. Is like, what even is the subject? Like, I don't think it's actually the character of Don Quixote. I think there's actually something more profound going on.
Mm.
And then on the end, the last thing I'll say, and we can talk about this and anything else for the last few minutes, is then she translates it, after she translates it into subject, right, for all these different, and then she translates it into style. But she then translates it into what on the last page? Into emotional,
Sense of life.
a
Yeah,
sense of what?
emotional.
A more, right? Um, in sense of life terms or emotional terms, right? Hugo gives me the feeling of entering a cathedral. Dostoevsky, a feeling of entering a chamber of secrets, but with a powerful guide, right? So on and so forth. So I think that is such a critical practice. She doesn't advocate for like a self-help person today would, right? Like do the practice of journaling in the morning. But I think like I bought a big notebook that's all fancy. And I sometimes try to write down some of my thoughts about a work of art and exploring it. And I also love talking to friends about works of art. And that's the kind of friends that I like to have in my life, are people that I can actually have real conversations about this, because I think that's so profound for whether you're an artist or an engineer or whatever. It's human to want and need that contemplation. It's not an optional frill. Art is not that.
Mm.
Now those are the main things that,
Agree.
I mean, there's a lot in this essay. So if there's anything else you guys wanted to talk about, but those, like, I think two or three points that I wanted to discuss, or 4 points, was the big things.
I think just to add to your point of these uh, various examples, also serve as a contrast to each other. And
Yeah.
as we were saying earlier, you don't have to necessarily agree with the artist's view of life. It's presenting uh, contrasting examples and uh, I would say encouraging to to broaden your range of art, to look at
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah. That's another example that you get out of this art and sense of life. And I think we'll get more of that as we move on. She's trying to get to the deepest fundamental, mechanisms, the function, as Marx, like what is the essence of what we're trying to get out of art. And it's important that she makes the distinction between philosophically false art and great aesthetic art. And I think what is meant to me and what I'm taking from her and other people I've read about aesthetic as especially if you think about like fine art, is that it is about the experience and it's about experiencing in some level. That's what makes um, I like to call it like the imaginative fiction world, different than the journalistic world in a sense of what we're trying to like the nonfiction versus fiction. Like when you when you enter the realm of gold, as John Keats puts it, you're trying to be taken somewhere.
Mm.
And and like have an experience. Now, sometimes that experience is going to be bad. Sometimes the person's going to be bad at getting you to where he actually wants you to get to, and that's not good either. And that's how you kind of evaluate it. But it is about the experience. There's a great book by Mortimer Adler called How to Read a Book, which if you haven't read that, I recommend it. And he talks about all different kinds of ways of reading. Mortimer Adler is one of the guys who put together the Great Books of the Western World series back in like the 50s. And I think he likes for the imaginative one, he has this whole section on how to read imaginative literature. And that's and he differentiates it from expository literature, which is more about trying to tell you about an experience or about an idea. Whereas imaginative literature is more about trying to get you to have the experience. I want you to feel what it feels like to be heartbroken because you fall in love, but that person doesn't love you. That's, certain art will do that. Or to be, to pursue a career and have a conflict of the woman you love is trying to stop you from experiencing that career and succeeding at that career. And like, and the conflict between those two things. Like, I want you to experience what that feels like. That's imaginative. So, okay. So any last thoughts on this essay? Art and sense of life?
No, lots of questions. One question I had was just there's a sense in which, do you guys ever, like the sense, it's like, what is the sense, what I'm feeling like a need for art? Or what is that
Mm,
feeling? And sometimes I have this, sometimes you just you feel a need for entertainment. Like maybe
sure.
is that something different, or is that just how it's expressing
I think
itself?
they're
Like,
related,
yeah, okay, yeah. So
personally.
it's not just, oh, I need a distraction or I'm tired and I need to relax. But
Sometimes you
that
need that.
does, but
Yeah,
then sometimes those motives do change what you're going to do, right? Sometimes we're
sure.
tired and we don't want to watch
Yes.
something really deep. And
Profound. Yeah.
then there's
Yeah.
periods where I did notice that like the fuel thing or the need thing came up where it's like every few years there's certain movies I always rewatch with my wife. We always watch them. And it's like, and where does that come from? It's not like something reminded me of it. It's just like I start feeling this need, and and I want to analyze that more now because I feel like that's kind of now with
Well,
these
that
essays, I'm
seems like a
thinking,
reaffirmation of life type thing, of sense of life. Like you're
yeah,
trying
well,
Sense
it
of
might be
life. Yeah.
like Spartacus or
yeah,
it's Lawrence of Arabia. We've seen
yeah,
every few years. We just keep watching it, and every time we're just like, this is so compelling and amazing, and we
yeah.
know every detail. Why is that we and it is about the world,
You
the
just want to live in
scope,
that
the
world.
scale.
Yeah,
Exactly. You want to live in that
yeah,
world, but I'm not thinking of it that way. But that is the psychological motivation, I guess.
absolutely.
It's like something is missing.
And I think she's talking about that here and in other places that we've already read about, so you've mentioned this about like there's design, and design can have beauty, it's artistic in many ways. She's trying to, like you can even think of it as like a fine art. Like there's a different realm of art she's talking about here that, I agree with you. Sometimes I just want to sit down and watch a silly sitcom and not think, right? Not like have profound experiences. That's to say there's nothing artistic or profound that is in them sometimes. And there, I
Mm,
think, are, but it's not the same thing as like sitting in an auditorium watching a grand new play or something, or Les
Yeah.
Miserables or something that's like really your full focus, or even a symphony. It's like your full focus. You're really thinking, you're on it, you're experiencing, or you're reading a novel and you're really challenging yourself to understand. Like that's a different experience, I think. And it's something unique. And I think that's what she's focused on in this book is like this realm. There's something that it's like once in a while or, weekly or whatever, we just need this. Religious people get it from church or something, I think, a lot of times, right? And they,
Hmm.
they go to church, and this is a secular man's, I think, a rational man's church is going to the art realm once in a while. It doesn't have to be every minute of every day, obviously. That's ridiculous. But yeah.
Yeah.
Michael, you have something to
There's
say? Maybe final thoughts? Because I got to get going. I got a play to go do.
You got to play, man. You got to go act.
That's right. But what's your last thought, Michael? And then I got to go.
well, it's just the distinction of subject as relating to existence and style as relating to consciousness was quite interesting to me. But the point of style of like what level of clarity an artist brings into focus his art, and maybe that's related to what you're saying of different. You want different types of art at different times of day or in different moods or something that
Yeah,
is
that's a good point.
related to your conscious state. Um,
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. All right, guys. Sorry we can't stay any
awesome.
longer this time. But 2 weeks from now, we'll do art and cognition. I'll try to see if I need to look at the schedule, see if I have time for 30 extra minutes because I think it's definitely needs that. Um, Otherwise, we'll do our best within the hour. But thank you guys so much
Cool.
and go experience some great art.
Yeah,
All right.
break a leg.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mark. Bye, Michael.